Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be the thought leader for today's opening presentation. And I would like to say that I think this is going to be a very interesting, informative, and very interactive session over the next 2 days. I would also like to say a special thank you to my manager and CEO of Synergy Research Group, Igor Stefanov, for his very valuable contribution towards the slide presentation, which I will walk you through now. In terms of the CRO and pharma industry, I think evolution is really something of the past. And to survive, we need to change. And I think if you are aware of Jack Welch, who is the former CEO of General Electric, he once said that when the rate of change on the outside is greater than the rate of change on the inside, then the end is near. And basically what we're saying is, in this world of rapid technological change, in order to survive, then you have to be ahead of the curve. So what I'm going to introduce now is the term and the concept of prevolution. So by prevolution, what we mean is the implementation of thoughtful, premeditated change resulting from the anticipation and analysis of future trends before they happen. In other words, being one step ahead of evolution. So what does today's R&D landscape look like? What you see here on the left-hand side of the screen is really some of the more recent innovations, breakthroughs, adaptive trial designs, for example. So the prevolution of the protocol, so the anticipation of what may happen, changing the protocol to allow for changes in future based on interim data analysis, for example. Patient-centric trials. So here we know that patients have become more educated with time, and therefore we need to involve patients more and at an earlier stage in trial design. It's very important. Precision medicines in trials. It's important that we pre-identify patients who may potentially benefit from trials, from genotyping and biomarkers, for example. And then there's real-world data as well. And here, if you think about the number of patients that actually take a medicine as a percent in clinical trials, as a percentage of all those who will ultimately take it, assuming, of course, the drug is successful, it's very small. So there is a pressure to bring real-world data in advance into the clinical trial setting. So these are some of the latest breakthroughs, these 4 particular items. On the right-hand side, the last 2 here, we appreciate that actually there are innovations and barriers to adoption of innovation. For example, workforce not adequately trained, cultural barriers, for example. And we will talk about in our discussion session some of these challenges and how we can overcome them through a number of different means. So what does a innovation adoption curve look like? These curves here are a distribution of innovation from Everett Rogers, 1962. And actually the television probably looks about 1962 as well, which is interesting because actually the television was a disruptive innovation. It changed things at the time. People said that the television, for example, may replace other media, so newspapers, journals, and radio, for example. Some people even said television would be the only communication moving forward. But we now know that that's not true, that other innovations come through, for example, the internet, as we've seen. So what you see is that innovations come and they go. What you see here on the blue curve is actually that innovations are adopted at different rates. So you have the innovators, you have the early adopters, and then of course the early majority, late majority, and then towards the end, the laggards, those that lag behind, the people who are coming along later in taking on that innovation. And the yellow curve obviously shows what would eventually be 100% adoption, for example. So what happens if we superimpose on these two graphs a look at quality? And by quality here we mean the essence of the innovation. And the best example to kind of share with you, as because most of you will be familiar with, is really the smartphone. And in essence, the smartphone was an innovation completely new. People before, had to press the buttons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 when you make your telephone call. Swiping your finger across the phone surface was a completely new innovation. Building in high quality definition cameras was new. But with time, that initial innovation, that initial quality, if you want to call it quality, kind of disappears. How do you move to the next level? It becomes small, as we say in English, bells and whistles. The iPhone, you can now have, supersize, or you can have a blue color. Those small innovations. So that's why you see this red curve gradually going off here, because you can't continually evolve that same new innovation. So it falls off with time. How does it look if you then superimpose that with revenue? So what you see here is that in the early stages, because the innovation costs money, the research and development, obviously there is no revenue from this perspective. It's a cost. It's only when you launch here that you start to get your revenue in return. And I think this is important to understand what is happening with all of these components. Now, remembering back to what we talked about pre-evolution, we in Synergy identify this particular kind of like area, this kind of time zone, as being the pre-evolution zone. That is to say, this is the time point, the latest time point in a way, that you need to start thinking about the next innovation. Because you know that this quality curve is going to decrease from the current innovation that you've introduced. So you need to start thinking about, and the further this is over to the left, then of course the earlier the innovation, and therefore the earlier the revenue will come for the next innovation. So we move from Russian Revolution in 1917 to Russian pre-evolution in 2018. And about 5 years ago at this conference, although I wasn't present, I understand that there was a suggestion that the Russian CROs, local CROs, should kind of form alliance and start to work together to be more competitive against some of the more global companies. That didn't actually transpire, that didn't happen. So in Synergy, what we did in the last 10 months is we actually built a global alliance. So we thought about what the challenges are in the industry, and we realized that to survive, we need to work in partnership. We need to work in an alliance. And by forming a global alliance of smaller CROs, we are able to now tap into the global clinical trials that we couldn't attain ourselves, because no sponsor is going to sign a contract with 10 local CROs across the globe. So we now have a single legal entity in Singapore, and we can actually operate with a point of contact directly with the sponsors. And what you see here, I think, speaks for itself. So we have 13 members, 95 countries, nearly 1,700 employees, and over 266 ongoing studies. Most of these companies are CROs. Clinigen at the moment is the exception. It is a large global clinical trial supplies company. It also has a number of other arms. And I think this is important because in 10 months, we've achieved 13 members. And we have a very, very solid base on which to work with agreements, with membership rules and regulations, and I'll explain some more a little bit later. What we can do and what we will build on here is what we call add-ons or bolt-ons. The pharma industry has done the same. The pharma industry has bolted on different alliances with smaller organizations, with universities, with small startups. We are going to do the same. We are going to bolt on specialist CROs, for example. Pediatric oncology is a good example. We can add on other organizations like Clinigen that are not CROs that can still add value, like biostorage, for example, translation companies. And together, this will mean we will share a lot more of our own client base and therefore drive more business, not to mention the business that will come from the website and from promotions of this type. In terms of core values, I think this is important. How do you bring together 13 companies in just 10 months and form a global company? And I think a lot of this is really based on, teamwork and trust. Transparency is probably a key here. We have existing relationships both at the business level with these other companies and also on a personal level. And I think you can't take away that personal relationship, which is really important. People were prepared to join because of the trust level. There's no hidden agenda. Obviously, we believe in excellence, and I'll talk about quality in a moment. Innovation is very important, and I'll elaborate a little bit further on that. But simplicity is critical as well. We all know that in larger companies, whether pharma or otherwise, then you will have a lot of bureaucracy, you'll have a lot of politics. Here in our organization, we're all small companies that can make decisions and move quickly. And that's why we've been able to build something in a short period of time. Innovation. By Q1 2019, we will launch our first blockchain product. So we're going to use blockchain for contracts internally, contracts with sponsors, and including informed consent ultimately. So our first product will launch in Q1 2019. Blockchain, again, innovation. Again, it's kind of a disruptive innovation. Risk-based, we have formed a partnership. Again, key to this is partnership, bolt-ons, because no one company today can do everything. And that's the important point. You have to work in partnership. You have to work in alliance. We formed an alliance with a German-based company called Syntegrity to provide the support for risk-based monitoring. In fact, we as a company, as a cross, believe in risk-based everything. It's more than just monitoring. We have to be smarter in the way that we work. And of course, agile. And one of the advantages of being small, it's easier to move. It's easier to make decisions. It's easier to get things done. In terms of governance, people say you've got 13 members, there's so much diversity. Well, first of all, it comes back to the trust level that we have in forming this, because we have very solid personal and business relationships between all of the organizations. We've set up an executive committee. The executive committee is made up of members, senior members of the member companies. In most cases, they are also the owners of these companies. So we've got a solid executive committee, and we've built a standards office, innovation technology board, and quality management board. And let me explain a little bit more about each of these. So the standards office is really making sure that as an organization, as an alliance, that we can work to one standard. So around education and training, we actually have one set of SOPs. We have built a set of SOPs that we can use globally, so the client doesn't need to worry about different SOPs because of different members. We're also harmonizing on some of our technology. Not all technology, because each company still has some freedom to move, but in terms of how we operate to ensure that all the materials that we hold from clients is secure. And as I mentioned, policies and procedures, the SOPs have been harmonized. We also have an innovation and technology board, very important. So we have our own investigator database. Risk-based monitoring, I have already mentioned. Blockchain, Q1 2019, the first product will be launched. Operational tools, I've mentioned. We will make sure that we will have client information in secure CFR 21 Part 11 compliant software. Customer relationship management. Sometimes our members are working with different companies, or the same companies, I should say, because we're global, but we could all work with GSK, for example, or MSD. So there is also, we need to understand between us who is working with whom, so we can benefit and streamline and target our relationship with those particular clients. And then last but not least, something which is novel is we're going to launch an online budgeting tool. And this will allow people to come to our website and actually punch some data in, phase 3 study, 3,000 patients, this country, this country, this country, and get a ballpark figure for a particular therapy area of what that budget may look like. As far as I'm aware, no one has done that. So it's going to be transparent, coming back to our core value, transparency, simplicity, allowing people to interact with us. And then the quality management board. This comes back to our core value around excellence. So with regards to quality management system, we've actually developed a QMS common principles grid based on Transcelerate's clinical QMS framework. So we're working towards one quality standard. SOPs, as I've mentioned, a core set of SOPs. And then of course from an audit perspective, we have different members around the world. We are able to offer auditing service locally in that particular region, and of course with multiple languages as well. And finally, if you think about study execution, this is a question that people have asked, is if we are competing or going to compete now with the larger CROs on the global level by introducing cost-effective solutions, then we have a legal entity. There is only one contract that's required to be signed with the client. We have a lead project manager, and they will manage the different operating companies that are selected by the client to conduct the global study. So again, we have project management SOPs that are standardized, and everyone has their role to play. They understand who is the lead project manager, job description goes with it, clinical project manager for the country or for the company, the member company. Everyone is clear in terms of their roles and responsibilities. So in essence, what we have thought about over the last year is, where is the industry going? And we know that you can't survive by yourself necessarily to do something at a global level. You really have to work in partnership. And if you think about this from the airline industry perspective, the airline has done the same with Star Alliance, with One World. They have come together. They are competitors, but they are working in a global environment and have been extremely successful in doing so. So if you think about where we are now, evolution is very slow. It means the outside environment is going to change you. And I think the evolution in the pharma, the healthcare industry, will ultimately by itself lead to extinction. Whereas pre-evolution, thinking about where we're going in the future, anticipating and analyzing what is happening and being prepared for it, will not only mean that you will survive, but you will be able to thrive. Thank you.